Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Realms Remembered. This is Michael T. Bradley. We're going to try to get through quite a bit today and kind of clear the way for 3rd edition. Can you believe it? We'll see. Who knows? I might find I have more than I thought I had to say, and this might need to be divided into 2 parts, but I think we're going to get through it because, honestly, there's nothing huge to talk about here. Even the books that I like, I feel like I don't have that much to say about it, and as I've said before, I think I'm just feeling a little burnt out. Gonna get through this, gonna take a much longer break before we embark into 3rd edition. And I think I will come back into that kind of guns blazing because I've read about half of the Archwizards trilogy already, and I really liked it, so I am excited to get back into it after a break. Want to read some stuff that's not fantasy at all, want to just, you know, go all over the map and read a bunch of different stuff and kind of clear my head from feeling like I have read too much Forgotten Realms. In fact, right now the stuff that I'm reading that I'm really enjoying is a lot of crime fiction. Crime fiction in general has that Hemingway-esque sort of short, lean prose. Really in the mood for some lean prose right now because the Realms stuff is a little bit prose heavy. Even the Malazan stuff, which I absolutely love, is a bit heavy on the prose in a very different way, however. Let's talk about the Jewel of Termish by Odom. We're back in 1370 here. I guess we're not back in it. We never really left it. 1370, Jewel of Termish. The main plot, there's a evil lich wizard thing, and he wants revenge on a city, blah, 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 blah. The only thing really interesting about the main plot is the fact that the bad guy's name is Boran Kiosk, which just sounds like Baron Kiosk, which every time I read it made me think like Baron Help Desk, which doesn't really work for a frightening bad guy name. Yakovus from the Rising Tide trilogy was such a great bad guy name. Baron Vestibule just doesn't work for me at all, and he wasn't very interesting to read about. It started off pretty good, and I kept it kept having these little moments where I thought, oh, something more is going to come of this. Also, but really nothing ever did. But also another fun thing about it is that druids are sold in this as if they are the be-all, end-all, like as if every player character should play a druid because they're so powerful. And I've known one person that I've ever gamed with, who played a druid, and basically he just kept summoning badgers at everything. And to me that's never made sense, because I'm like, you're a peaceful, land-loving person, yet you summon these creatures to go die for you? I think there's something in there about like, oh, they're okay or whatever, but I always played it as I might have said this before, some people think I'm horrible for this, but I would always give detailed histories on what these animals were doing. Like, you know, oh, little Mr. Badger is telling Mrs. Badger and the Badger children about how he furrowed out a great big piece of dirt today and found a turnip. Oh my god, he's fighting a werewolf! And then he's killed and he returns and he's okay, but those scars are gonna mark him forever. Anyway, druids. They're apparently the most awesome thing ever. At least Mel Odom would like us to believe so, because they're like, just, he plays them off as if they're like, I don't know, like this mix of like Clint Eastwood and God. I don't remember druids being this awesome, and I'm like, druids weren't new to 3rd edition, were they? Like, could this have been, because this is part of the cities, which is technically 3rd edition, I believe. Is it possible that druids were new in 3rd edition, or maybe they were trying to, like, show off how revamped they were? It really feels that way. Just seems a bit ridiculous. In any case, the most interesting thing about this novel is in a lot of ways it kind of serves as a codex to the Rising Tide trilogy, because in this you get a lot of mentions of how the Sahuagin, now living in that inner sea area, affects trade and has changed things, and I really never got a feel for this from reading the Rising Tide stuff. I think they go there at the end of Book 2. I could be misremembering, but I think it's the end of Book 2, and then Book 3 is essentially 3 big fights at the end. So that was kind of interesting to see that, oh, Rising Tide really did have an impact on the world in a lot of ways, because Book 3 did not feel like it did at all. Let's go ahead and talk about Salvatore's Hunter's Blades trilogy. The Thousand Orcs, The Lone Drow, The Two Swords. Skimmed my way all the way through the Thousand Orcs, and it is just as I remember it. There is tons and tons of stuff going on. None of it interesting, very little of it having to do with our party. It's weird. It feels as if Bob is just bored with Drizzt and the rest of them. There's like A little bit with Drizzt and Catti-brie, their sexual tension. I don't know, maybe they even like decide that they're meant for each other or whatever, but I don't think they do. I don't think that ever goes anywhere, at least not in the first book, because then I just skipped book 2 and 3 because I just did not care. The thing that interests me the most about this trilogy, and I would love to see if anyone has interviewed Salvatore on this, is the fact that the kind of main idea behind this trilogy is, at the end of the first one, there's a siege on a town, this dwarven town that most of the party is helping out with, and Drizzt is off doing something else, helping out in some other way that he's not involved in the siege, or defending the siege. And Drizzt comes back and finds evidence that leads him to believe that the rest of his party has been killed. So he thinks that they're all dead, and so, like, you know, book 2 is supposedly him becoming this being of vengeance. It's like Drizzt is the Punisher, essentially, because he thinks that everyone else is dead. This is a conceit that's used to varying effect in comics a lot, this idea of like, oh, this person's dead, and, you know, since we can't really kill off a franchisable character, let's do a pretend story and see how it affects people. Like, the Fantastic Four just recently did it with Johnny Storm. You know, Hickman, the writer, was up front and said, basically, this obviously isn't going to last, but I want to see what the effect would be on everybody around it. You know, what would the loss of Johnny from the Fantastic Four do to them and the surrounding characters? I think he's even back by now. Anyway, point being, it is an idea that's been done a lot before, and as I said, to varying effect. I haven't even read the Hickman stuff, so it might be amazing for all I know. My point is simply that sometimes that's really good, and sometimes it just feels cheap. That's the basic idea behind this Drizzt trilogy. So I wonder how Salvatore felt. I wonder at what point he was told, essentially, that his next series of Drizzt books had to pull everything into 4th edition, and essentially there's really no getting around the fact that a good portion of his characters are going to have to die. I haven't actually read them, so I have no idea who dies and when, but I believe a couple of people have commented on me making comments, or me saying things in earlier podcasts or vlogcasts, whatever the hell these are. They aren't really vlog anyway. That Drizzt is the only one remaining of the party. I think it looks like Jarlaxle is back, and somehow, possibly, Entreri, he can just outlive any... He's like a part cockroach or something. But as far as I know, I think, you know, like Brunor and Wulfgar and Catti-brie and possibly Regis. I can't remember how long halflings live. Possibly Regis. I think they're all dead at this point, and as far as I know, that basically all has to happen in transition. So I imagine it must have been difficult after writing a trilogy about how the party's death affects your main character. You know, it must have been difficult being told, hey, your next trilogy has to be about how the party's death affects your main character, essentially. That's got to be difficult. In some ways, it's maybe a blessing, because you have in this, like, Drizzt turns into Batman, basically, or Punisher, or whatever. That way, it kind of gives you a chance for when it happens the next time for him to have kind of mellowed out, and he's not going to go down that route because he sees what it got him or whatever. Because that would be, you know, it's kind of awesome to read about for one book if it's done the right way, which I did not feel Lone Drow was. But it's pretty dull if that's your entire series, and I think Drizzt would get really old really fast if that were the case. But instead, now he can kind of have learned from that or whatever. And who knows, for all I know, they all live to a ripe old age. They just die, or yeah, it's because it's been like 96 years, so... Unless Catti-brie is, like, doddering old woman at the end of transitions. But as I say, I'm pretty sure somebody mentioned on here that they're all gone by now. Except Jarlaxle and, apparently, Entreri somehow. Yeah, mainly skipped that. Just was not interested. Just could care less about these orcs, and just Salvatore's overwriting. It's weird because we have seen what Salvatore can do. And Sellswords might not have been out at this point yet, but Silent Blade definitely was. And Servant of the Shard definitely was. And those are so much better, and you can just tell that he is more interested in his side characters. I mean, even here, we're dealing so much with side characters. I didn't like these side characters, I didn't find them interesting, but we're dealing like 2/3 with side characters, and maybe 1/3 of the book with Drizzt and his party. Book 2 of Counselors and Kings, The Floodgate, moving into 1371 for real now. You know, it's so weird with Elaine Cunningham how, like, seriously, some of her books just don't interest me at all, and then some of them are really, really good, I think. Floodgate it plays almost like a detective story, because we start piecing together all the different parts of this bigger mystery that's going on, like why these characters work together, how they knew each other, what impact it's having on the next generation, etc., etc., etc. Builds up to this giant Wizardwar at the end, which is pretty awesome, and I really thought that's what Book 3 would be, since it's called the Wizardwar. But instead, we have it at the end of Book 2. We have this giant battle, people moving in from the east, I think it is, into Halrua, the capital city of which is Halara, which I don't know why they make some of these words ridiculously difficult, but they do. And they it was a solid second part of a trilogy. Generally, second parts of trilogies fade a little bit, get a little weaker. This one felt really good. Had a pretty big explosive climax for almost everyone. Book 3 continues on with that, and there's an odd sort of feeling to it, because our main characters, two of which we have very romantic entanglements between, or at least it feels that way, and it's never quite clear until the very end, like, is this going to be, you know, the first 3 seasons of Moonlighting kind of interaction forever, or is this going to continue on to the last part of Moonlighting? And it's I won't spoil it as to whether it gets resolved the first way or the second way. With Elaine, since she obviously likes writing her characters on and on and on, I will say that even if it ends without them romantically involved, it seems very possible that she might have planned further stuff involving them in which they did get romantically involved, or in which, if it does end with romantic involvement, it would have gone further. The Wizardwar, Part 3 of the trilogy, I think is the weakest of the trilogy, simply because A, there's not much of a wizard war. Like, some wizards fight at the end, but it's like 4 wizards fighting. It feels almost Harry Potter-esque at the end of it, rather than the massive conflagration that occurs at the end of Book 2, which I found far more interesting. The other thing is all the pieces kind of finally fall into place, and we know why everybody did what they did, and it's not really that interesting. I mean, it's kind of straightforward what we've been guessing from the beginning. I mean, there are a couple of twists to it, but they're twists in the sense that, oh, I didn't see that coming. I don't really care, but I mean, you know, that's why I didn't see it coming, because I didn't care to think about it. But you know, whatever. And there are a lot of extended scenes with Tsigany, which is our main female character, the slightly less Mary Sue character than Aurelia, or whatever the hell her name is over in the Elfsong books. Kind of doing this, she has this like backwards divining magic. I can't remember what the term for it is, but there's a term, I think it starts with Tella, where you can touch an object and tell its past. She has that, and she can also go into her own history and see her ancestors' memories. And so she keeps seeing her mother's memories to try to find out more about herself. And those parts are really dull. They're really, like, I was skipping them intensely. And basically that's her for the first half, 2/3 of the book, because she's trapped in the Unseelie realm. So she doesn't have anybody to interact with. In any case, it's a fine resolution to everything. Like, I don't have any problems with it from a story perspective. I just have problems with the fact that the story itself is not really that interesting in the grand scheme. But solid throughout, and definitely a good trilogy. This is actually the only trilogy of Elaine's, or the only series of books of Elaine's, that I have enjoyed from beginning to end. Yes, there were skippable parts, but skipping them didn't make me feel like I missed anything. So I was fine there. Really fun characters. I know Elaine has kind of groused a little bit. I won't say complained, but kind of groused a bit on some forums that 4th edition, because it essentially destroys Halrua, kind of makes this entire trilogy pointless. But I don't know. I still say it's a good read, and you know, we're all still clamoring for more Netheril fiction, even though Netheril has been destroyed since 1st edition, basically. I mean, since the beginning, Netheril's been destroyed, and we all really want to read more stories about Netheril. So I don't think it dismisses the worthiness of this story any. Really good story, really recommended, and I love the covers. On the other hand, Evermeet, which I was very curious to read. I love these kind of, you know, city books, like Cormyr, a novel. The city series, though, not as much like Jewel of Termish. I mean, Allegorn or whatever it is. Who's heard of that and who cares, right? But Evermeet, you know, learning the history of this and having this kind of sweeping Thornbirds-esque saga about cities within the realms. Problem is, so many of them are just dull. So far, I've enjoyed the city series for the most part, but Cormyr and this just, really, really dull. I kept kind of skimming through Evermeet because it goes through a lot of time, so I was like, okay, well, next chapter, it's going to get really cool. It's like, oh, here it's mostly gods, and I don't care about them, so I'm going to skip to the next chapter, and it'll be the elves, and it's like, okay, these are the early elves, and they're kind of boring, but skip to the next chapter, and it'll be really good. And so I think I kept skipping chapters until I was about 2/3 of the way through the book, and then I was like, okay, I just really don't care. I just don't care. I think there's an assault on Evermeet, and possibly some of the rules change. I don't know. I'm really hoping that once we get to the Archwizards trilogy, since a lot of our main characters there are elves, that they'll talk about what happened in Evermeet that means anything, because I sure as hell didn't find out from reading the book. If anybody wants to comment. Oh, that's the other thing, that Driz trilogy, did anything worth mentioning happening in it? Or did anything worth mentioning happen in it? If it did, please leave a comment. Let me know. I'd be curious to find out. All I know is, like, King Obold went around and was like, I got lots of orcs, and I just didn't care. So yeah, if anything happens in either of these and somebody wants to, like, spell it out, that would be great, because I don't know what's up there. Be back for next episode as we finish up 2nd edition here on Realms Remember.